Well, this is one hell of a chunky boy, and it only took me 8 years. Howdy folks, I'm Autumn Witch and welcome to Bleeding Tree Gaming. Now today's video is for ORKTOBER, and it's a project I started years ago and left unfinished. As I am making an effort to finish more and buy less, I thought this would be the ideal time to introduce this mighty orc kill tank. Okay, now the eagle-eyed among you may notice that it has already been built. Yes, I did most of the work here before we started the channel. However, I did take some pictures of the process. So I'll go through how I built it before we crack on with painting. I started, strangely enough, by attempting to build a replica of the original Rogue Trader Land Raider out of foam core, just as a way to experiment with scratch building. Then I started collecting orcs and realised I could do something with the janky old model and started to stick bits on. Now, here we have photos. I grabbed a pretty dodgy old immolator top test print that I did when I first got my 3D printer and stuck that on top so I had a mount for the turret. I covered any major holes and gaps with card strips and card paneling. I used chipboard, which is basically just very thick cardstock, to make the tracks, just layering up different shapes to get some I'm going to use something buzzwordy like, I don't know, structurality or some ridiculous shit like that. Since I have bought so many Rhino kits over the years, I used spares to build up the structure and paneling. The turret is made from 4 turret mounts from the Rhino kit, made into a box, with an old vape bottle as a cannon, and another to secure it on the tank itself, whilst enabling it to be turned or even removed for painting or posing, because I like moving bits. The doors and exhausts come from the redundant sides in the old Forge World Demos Rhino kit, which was basically the regular Rhino kit with different sides and a different front. And the bigger exhausts came from the Flamestorm cannons in the Land Raider Redeemer / Crusader kit. I used lots of panels and smaller parts from various kits to build up the layers of detail. I used rhino hatches to make a breech loader thing for the gun turret. I used an old Space Crusade Dreadnought gun as a secondary heavy weapon. The ram on the front came from the old Battlefield Obstacles kit, you know, the ones that came with tank traps and barrels and the like. I had a load of orc panels left over from my Stomper build, and they fit on rather nicely. I also had a load of Imperial terrain bits left over from the previous terrain line, so some low walls and lighting parts, also some ladders. There's really too many parts to cover fully, but I think the busyness of the whole thing really works with the cluttered orc aesthetic. Now to paint it. Firstly, it gets a prime of high coat gunmetal. This is like a cheap lead belcher in a can. It takes a little longer to dry than other high coat sprays, so give it some time to dry, but the result is rather nice. I went in with an all-over dry brush of a lighter silver, in this case for Yeho silver, and just to pick out those details. Then I did a heavy overbrush with Avalon Sunset. Didn't need to be neat here, as I could tidy up later much quicker than if I'd carefully painted each panel. For most models, doing this is some kind of sacrilege. However, with orcs it just works. Then I picked out some panels and glyphs with Macragge Blue. Some of it came out a little too blotchy, so I came back later with a second coat. Then I did similar with a Yeho Black. Then I did the same again with Mephiston Red, trying not to go too heavy with it, as too much red with the yellow will lean heavily towards the corporate image of a rolling McDonald's. Then I did Corax White, which covers really nicely. I also picked out some bone parts and wires with it, which I plan to use contrast paints on. After going back in and tidying up, I added skeleton horde to the bone areas, and then just some different contrast paints on the wires. With that done, it was time to hit with washes. I decided to mix up an enamel wash with a mix of black and brown panel liners, which is like basically enamel wash but with a very fine brush. But my brown was running low, so I topped it up with white spirit and added some black to it. And rather than go in with the little brush, because it's a big model, I grabbed a pipette and began squirting it over the major areas. I also used the pipette to recycle any puddles where it pooled too much, and once it was covered, I leave it to dry for a few hours. Then I gave the whole thing a very light dry brush with bone white, just to make those edges stand out a little more. I grabbed an old knackered brush and came in with Typhus Corrosion, stippling it heavily in areas where grime and dust would gather, such as the tracks, and a bit lighter in patches on the armour and in recesses. When that had dried, I grabbed Riser Rust and hit those rusty patches. It's best to start lightly and, build up, as opposed to putting too much on and regretting it. Riser Rust was made to pair with Typhus Corrosion, and they go together really well. It also picked out very nicely the glyphs on the tank tracks. There are points in every project where it looks awful, but I find that even though it goes through stages of looking pretty crap, there's always a point where suddenly the process starts to pay off and it starts to look really good. I have a few of these projects sitting half finished where I had no faith in the process at the time. Sometimes it's important to remind yourself what you can do if you stick to the techniques that you know will work. Final part of the weathering is weathering powders. I chose a dark slate grey to act as soot from the exhausts and around any of the vents. I then grabbed a umber, this one's a Vallejo umber, to hit the tracks and the flat areas to give the impression of various layers of built up grime and dried in muck. I then dabbed on some water to clear the raised areas, but leave it as trodden in dirt in the recesses. Now that's pretty much the tank finished. Lastly, I painted in the lenses and lights with Corax White and hit them with some bright contrast colours for a quick lighting effect. I might do something more detailed later, but for now it will look good on the table as it is. Now for the crew. I grabbed some assorted grots that I had lying around, but I felt I needed more, so I fired up Cult 3D and grabbed a few free ones to 3D print. If you want to see how I speed paint orcs and grots, let me know in the comments below and I'll slot a tutorial video into my schedule. And here's the finished tank. Stick around to see some shots of it with the rest of my bag moons. I'd like to thank Guy from Midwinter Minis for providing the impetus, or kick up the arse, for me to finally get around to finishing this model. If you liked this video, please let us know by hitting the appropriate buttons. We also have a Ko-fi account if you fancy bunging us a couple of quid to keep us in hobby supplies. Check out our affiliate link for Element Games, which also helps us out, and do consider joining our Discord. All links are in the description below. So, here's some fantastically lovely beauty shots of my orc army. Thanks for watching. I'm Autumn Witch, and I'll catch you next time on Bleeding Tree Gaming.